There we go. All right, so Nick, I think it was you who requested this. So I just thought it's worth checking in that what it was you wanted out of this.
Well, really, it's because when I'm out, I'm sort of looking at everybody's sales settings, and they're all a bit different. And all I'm trying to do is look at what people are doing.
Okay.
I know it's a touchy-feely thing, but I'm kind of wondering, is there a basic principle that I'm missing?
Okay. Well, what I'll do is I'll start from basics. Some of it you've probably heard before, but then we'll slowly build up, and then we'll get to the point at which, this is how you set your sails for upwind, downwind, and hopefully that'll then give you that bit more insight because the basics give us that tool to realise what we're doing, if that makes sense.
Great.
Okay, so what we're going to start with is we're going to start talking about Spanish galleons. Sorry, my typing went in that is awful. Then we're going to have a quick look at aeroplane wings. Then we're going to talk about twist. And at no point in those first three are we actually really going to talk about specifically darts or specifically how to sail a dart or set a dart. Twist sort of starts to get into that. And only at that will we start to actually say, okay, so what's the dart main like? The main and jib. And then we can have a look at some specifics there and we can go through the different points of sail. But I just want to spend the first 5 minutes talking about Spanish galleons, aeroplane wings and twist first, because that gives us a really good stepping stone for what's actually going on the dart, so we can understand it. Okay, so the first thing is Spanish galleons. So why do I want to talk about those? I just want to talk about these because this is really just describing to a completely non-sailor what a dart mainsail is all about. The answer is it's not a Spanish galleon sail. So you've got a Spanish galleon, the big ones like this, big boat with a house on the back with some big sails like that. And they've sometimes had a small couple of sails here. But their main sails, these big floppy sails here. And the way these work is that the wind blows that way and pushes them along. So there's no way they can physically go faster than the wind because the wind is just pushing them along. And this method is fundamentally flawed, really, because what happens if your Spanish galleon is in a bay and he's moored here and he wants to go out this way to deal with his trade, wants to deliver some goods. But unfortunately, this day, the wind is going that way. Which means that if he wants to get out of port, he could be here. He could go this way, and he can go this way, and he can go this way. But he cannot get any closer than 45 degrees on the wind, because all he can do is set his sail like this, and the wind will push his boat along. He can't do anything else. They called it bayed, apparently. You can be bayed for a couple of days because the wind is just in the wrong direction. You're just stuck. You can't get out. And I think this is something to do with the trade winds as well, the prevailing winds across the Atlantic. To essentially, they took the trade wind routes because that's where the wind was generally pointing in the right direction for them to get across the Atlantic. That's how I understand it anyway. I don't know the detail. But essentially, when people think about a sailing boat as in the wind blows you along, even when you look at a Formula 18 spinnaker, the big spinnakers, that spinnaker boats, the spinnakers do not work on this principle either. So no modern sailing boat works on this principle. So that's just dispelling any myths about how sails work, how sails might not work. So what I want to come on to now is aeroplane wings. Because aeroplane wings are actually much more similar to how a Dart 18 main works than the Spanish galleon sail. So I think most people will have seen at school picture of an aeroplane wing like that, where it's bigger at the top than at the bottom, and then the airplane's going that way, so it forces wind across the wing. And it forces wind across the wing here, and it forces wind across the wing here. Now, because this top side is slightly longer than this bottom side, the wind has further to go, and ends up producing a low pressure area on this side. So you end up with low pressure here and high pressure here. Or at least this is how they teach it at school. I'm sure there's a lot more finesse to it than this, quite frankly. But that difference in pressure of low and high pressure is what gives the elevation for the aeroplane. Okay. So yeah, really poor pictures, but hopefully it gives you the gist of what we're talking about. So aeroplane wings, it's looking at, the important thing here is the flow of air, these two flows of air on the front and the back, on the bottom and the top of the wing. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get the aeroplane wing. This is still an aeroplane wing, and we're going to stick it vertical. Like that, ish, maybe. And then we're going to draw an America's Cup on the top of it. I can't do an America's Cup, it's got something like that, and I don't know, it's got a base. Looks more like an owl. But essentially, this is what America's Cup boats are doing. You're seeing them at the moment with big wing sails. I don't know if you've seen them on YouTube or various things, but actually there are some boats out there at the moment that they are making wings, aeroplane wings essentially, but sticking them vertically and then making them sail. I have sailed one, I've sailed a C-class only the once, and it's absolutely majestic boat to sail. It's so bizarre sailing a boat with a fixed wing. They do have a control in the middle to control the, like a split in the middle to be able to control the angle of the wing. But essentially that's what they're doing. They are just making this aeroplane wing go vertically, and they're using that to get the forward drive on the boat. So that's really what a Dart 18 sail is. It's a fabric aeroplane wing sticking up in the air. Okay. So yeah, it's like that. And it's just like an aeroplane wing, but you are trying to get the flow across the sail. So that's how I want you to imagine it. Is we're constantly trying to get that flow, the airflow on the back of the sail and the front of the sail right, appropriately. Okay. So that's dealt with my first two. I told you these would be quick. So that's dealt with Spanish galleons, and it's dealt with aeroplane wings. So now I want to do twist, and I want to explain what twist is on a sail, because it is important to understand. And I'm going to use two different pictures of the same picture, okay? Two different viewpoints of the same picture. So that's going to be our mast, and I'm going to draw some lines on this sail. The black line is going to be the bottom one. The red line is going to be a quarter of the way up. The yellow one's going to be there, and the green one's going to be there, okay? And now I'm going to draw the same sail, but I'm going to draw it from above. So we've got the mast, like that. And actually, when we're going upwind, for example, the mast doesn't do that, does it? It goes at an angle. So we've got our mast like that. And I'm going to have the black part of the sail doing that. And I'm going to have the red part of the sail doing that. And I'm going to have the yellow part of the sail doing that. And I have the green part of the sail doing that. Okay. And then I'm going to do another picture, which is going to be pretty much the same if I can get it. But instead of this one, I'm going to have the black half part of the sail doing that, and the red part doing that, the yellow part doing that, and the green part doing that. Okay. Oh, I just realized that on my screen, you can't necessarily see that one. So on the recording. So we've got two different sails. They're the same sail, but they've got two different settings. And we'll come on to how you change the settings between these two in a moment. But this one here has twist in it. And this one is flat. Okay. Now the flat sail is the one that's like the aeroplane wing. And the flat sail is a fast sail. So if you're trying to go fast, i.e. you're driving down the motorway in 5th gear or 6th gear, or how many gears your car's got, if you're driving down the motorway in top gear, that's a flat sail. And that's when you've got the airflow going wonderfully on both sides of the sail and you're going fast. However, if on the motorway you brake and you stop, you stall, you lose the airflow on your sail, you can't just start back up in 5th or 6th gear, it doesn't work. You need to start going back up the gears again. And so if you have a flat sail, if you start off in 6th gear, your car won't move. And it's the same with the flat sail. You can't just immediately say, this is my flat sail. You've actually got to get up to speed and get the boat going before you can use the flat sail. And so what you have to use is 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th gear. And your low gears is a twisty sail. So you have to use a twisty sail to accelerate. And then once you've got to a point at which you have accelerated, you can then use a flat sail. You essentially bring it all in to be a flat sail. Now, to be honest, the transition between a twisty and flat sail isn't long. It's only a couple of seconds. The boat does accelerate fast enough to go from twisty to flat reasonably quickly, 2-3 seconds. But it's important to understand, because if at any point you lose that airflow on your flat sail, you have to then go back to a twisty sail to get the airflow back again to be able to pull it back into flat again. So you do have that playing moment if you do actually lose that airflow. And we'll talk about knowing whether you've lost the airflow or not in a minute. But if you do lose that airflow, you need to ease it to get the twist back in the sail. Only a little bit, but just get the twist back in to let it reattach, and then you can pull it back in again. Okay? People happy with that principle? Yeah, I'm getting nods. Excellent. All right. So I might leave that there because that's actually quite a good picture. So we've done twist. So let's go on to dart, main, and jib. So, and Paul, do you want me to talk about single handling as well a little bit?
Yes, please.
Okay. I'll work on double handling to start with, and then we'll go single. Okay. So where are we going to go? So a dart safe start. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a different angles that we're going to go out. So we're going to talk about, first we're going to talk about upwind. Now upwind is the easiest one to talk about, but it's actually the most difficult one to get right, because there's more finesse to it, and there's more going on, and there's more different circumstances. Then we'll talk about downwind, and then we'll talk about the reach. The reach is the one where there's fewer simple answers. It's the one where you need to work on feel a lot more. And downwind, we'll talk about that as well. Okay. So first, let's do upwind, and we'll talk about a boat with a main and a jib. Okay. So we're going to talk about different wind strengths as well. So first, we're going to talk about perfect wind strength. So we're going to talk about 10 to 12 knots. Why 10 to 12 knots? I've picked it because this is where you are, there's lots of power, you can use it, the boat goes quickly, you're just getting someone on the trapeze, you are not overpowered. At no point are you having to let your sail out so that because you're too overpowered. You're actually trying to get all the power you want, and there's a lot there to use. Okay, so that's really this band, and this is sort of ideal perfect conditions, and this is the conditions that matches into this twist and flat sail the best. So we'll talk about this one first, then we'll talk about lighter conditions. Sorry, my wife's just put the hairdryer on, so hopefully you can't hear that. We'll talk about lighter conditions, and then we'll talk about heavy conditions after that. So 10 to 12 knots, as we've already said, we've got our two sails. So we've got the jib, sorry, the main and the jib. And what are these all doing? So let's talk about I'll do the overhead view as well, because I like the overhead view, it's quite important. So the boats, you've got the mast here, and you've got the mainsail there, and you've got the jib here. Okay. So the general principle is the powerhouse of the boat is the main. So the general principle is we are trying to pump wind around the main like that as efficiently as possible. We're trying to keep wind attached to both sides of the sail and pump it around the main. We've got the jib here as well, and the jib has two purposes, in my view. It's got contributes a bit of power to the boat. The way it contributes the most amount of power to the boat is it scoops a lot of wind. So the wind angle is always coming from here. So you can imagine there's this, it scoops a lot of wind here, and it scoops it all around the back of the main. And so it accelerates the wind on the backside of the mainsail, and that's why the jib, even though it's only a small jib on the Dart, that's why it produces a lot more power, and that's why it can manage an extra person on the boat. So that's what's going on, and that's what our intention is. So how do we actually get it to this point? So the jib needs to be on reasonably firm, and I'm sure you've all noticed that on the jib, I'll draw a bigger picture of the jib. On the jib, there are some bits of wool. So you've got one about here, you got one about here, and you got one about here, okay? For now, for this entire discussion, we're going to ignore the top two completely. They don't exist as far as we're concerned. Those ones are primarily for testing it to try and get your sheeting angle right. But if we've set our sheeting angle, we're out on the water. In fact, we might come onto the top one in light winds in a bit, but for now, we're in a decent wind strength situation. So we're only actually worried about the bottom one. So the crew needs to put on a reasonable amount of tension on the jib. And then once he's done that, it's these bottom two telltales here. Now I'm going to draw them in slightly different to how they are. I'm going to draw the far one in green because that's starboard. And I'm going to draw the near one in red because that one's port. And they are next to each other rather than offset on the actual boat, but I'm just drawing it like this for this purpose. So the helm needs to spend an awful lot of time looking at these two telltales. They are one of the most important indicators on the boat for him going upwind. And the reason is it's telling the helm what direction to sail in. So these are the indicators that tell you which way to steer, because you're wanting to go upwind, you're wanting to go as close to the wind as possible, and the wind moves. And these are the easiest indicator for that. So as we said before, you're trying to keep wind attached to the sail. So that means that if the far one is going, sorry, get the green. If instead of the green one flying like that, the green one's flying up. So that's the far one is flying up and the near one's flying okay. That means that you have lost your airflow on the back of the sail. So I'm just going to take this. I was trying to get my picture right. Yeah, that means that your sail's like this and the wind is coming in. And so on the red side of the sail, the airflow is doing that. But on the other side of the sail, the green one, the airflow is doing that. It's not able to, that vacuum here on this side of the sail, sorry, throwing orange, this vacuum here is not sufficient to be able to get that green flow of wind attaching to the back of the sail. So what you need to do is you need to re-angle the sail so that it's further out. Draw it properly this time. So it's further out so that the green can then actually attach. There's not always a lot, but you need to maneuver the sail so it's further out so the green can actually attach. Now, the issue here is that I've already said you can't do that. Normally on a reach, you would let the jib out because that would re-angle the sail. But we're not doing that on the beats. We're actually doing it by steering. So if the far one goes, that means that your sail is too far, is too close to the wind. It's like the boat's like that, and it's like that, but it's too closed. So you actually want it to be like that instead. So if the far one's going, the green one is going, that means you are not close enough to the wind. You can actually bear up, you can push your tiller away, and just only slightly, and then get slightly closer to the wind. And if you do that, then you will see the green one then sort itself out, and you will attach the airflow to the sail. Okay, like that. Does that make sense? Okay. So what happens if the red one is going? The red one is the opposite. So as you might expect, it's the opposite. So yeah, we've got the red one's flapping now. Going up like that. So what does that mean? That means the complete opposite. It means that our sail is like this to the wind. So the green side, there's lovely airflow around that side, but the red side, there's no airflow at all, because again, that vacuum isn't able to attach the airflow to it. And that means you're too close to the wind. So you need to pull the tiller towards you and bear off, and then get further away from the wind, and then the wind will reattach. Now, which one is worse? And this is important. This is going back to the twist point earlier. Is if the red one is flapping, only by a little bit, it's okay. But if it's flapping a lot, doing it red stalls out sail a lot quicker than a green problem. A red here, being too close to the wind stalls your sail out very quickly. And so what I'm saying is that sometimes if you then correct it with your steering, the boat's slowed down sufficiently that you need to put a bit of twist into the main for a couple of seconds to accelerate the boat again, because you've lost so much speed. But you need to put the twist back in the sail, and then you can pull it back in again. So we just come back to the twist point. When it's green and you need to head up, there's generally enough airflow for it to reattach quickly enough, so you don't need to worry about that. But yeah. So hopefully that makes sense on the jib, setting the jib for these conditions. All right, so we're going to set the main now. And we're going to assume that the jib is set correctly here, because the jib's telling us the right angle to sail at. And now we're going to set the main based on that. So draw a big main picture. And again, we'll draw the top down view. And again, we're after that nice airflow across the two sides. So again, we've got some telltales on the main. We've got a telltale set here. We've got a telltale set here. A telltale set up here. And what we're after is after this position here. So once we're moving nicely, we're after this flat position, this aeroplane wing position. And this is where we will find that the airflow is working evenly across both sides of the mainsail. So how do we do that? We do that with again one telltale, one set of telltales, but it's the opposite to the jib. So you ignore the bottom two and only worry about the top one. And why the top one? That's because the top one is this green one here. It's most sensitive to the main control. So if you let your main out, the black doesn't move that much. The bottom of the sail doesn't move much at all, whereas it's the top of the sail that moves massively when you let your main sheet out. So that's why we worry about the top one for our sensitivity here. And again, you've got the one on the, because we're going that way, the green one's going to be the far one, and the red one can be the near one. So what does this mean? If the green one is flying, if the far one is, sorry, let's get it the right way around, yeah. Well, let's work on the red one first. So if the red one is flying, that's the near, if the red one is flapping, that's the near telltale. That's the near one like that. Then that's flapping because there's no airflow on the inside of the sail. And if you can imagine the wind is going this way on these two sails here, you can see it on the twisty side, the top of the sail, you'll get no airflow connection on the inside of the sail. So that's the situation when the near one is going. So you need to pull your sail in. It's saying that you've got too much twist in your sail at the moment. You can handle some less twist, you can get a flatter sail, and you can pull that in. So that's what you need to do if the near one is flapping. You need to pull your sail in. And then if the far one is flapping, something that I haven't really talked about this session is happening. It means that we haven't got the twisty position. We haven't even got the flat position. We've got something else. We've got a hooked position. And hooked is bad, quite simply. So what does a hooked position look like? Hooked position looks about okay for the bottom. And when you go to the red, it's probably similar. And when you get to the orange, it starts to look like this. When you look at the green, it looks like that. So actually you've pulled on your main sheet so tight that the top of the sail is now windward of the center line of the boat. You can imagine the center of the line of the boat is here. And you've done what we call hook the sail. And it's possible because of the nice big full battens that we got in the sail, you can do this, especially in light winds. It's very easy to do this. So yeah, that's how you tell if your sail's hooked. If you've done this, if the far tail has lost all attachment at the top of the sail. And so what do you do then? You let it out. So you have to let the sail out, and you have to let it out to a flat sail. But actually, it's a bit like on the jib. You've lost attachment on the far side of the sail. That's bad. So you actually have to go to a twisty sail very quickly. So you have to let it out slightly more than you want to, and then pull it back in again. It's only literally half a second, but you just have to let it out just an extra armful, just to pull it back in, just to reattach the airflow around the back of the sail. And then yeah, that's it. You can keep on with this flat sail, and that's the objective, is we're trying to get to the flat sail, and you can assess that with these top two telltales. What I found really, really useful on the F-18, now this is legal on the F-18, what I'm about to say is not legal on the Dart. So if you go to a big Dart competition, you're not allowed to do this, but I'm sure that in a club situation, people wouldn't mind too much. Sorry, just got a thingy saying that the Zoom thing's running out in 10 minutes. We'll manage that in a moment. Is something called a leech telltale. I don't know if anyone's heard of this. And this is, instead of relying on these top two telltales here, the green and the red one, you can just get an extra telltale, and you want it at the same level as the green and the red, and you just put it on the leech here, like that, one telltale like that. So we have them on the F-18, and actually these are more helpful than the green and the red. And that's because they're easier to see. You can't see the green one, the far one, half the time, because if the sun's going one direction or it's raining or something like that, they can be very difficult to see. So the leech telltale will help you with training and help you with that feel, but you would have to take them off for a proper regatta. So how do you use them? They're actually very helpful, because the leech telltale sits here like that. Now, if you've got airflow only on one side of the sail, they will do one of two things. So if you've only got airflow on the near side of the sail, if you've only got airflow on the far side of the sail, so that's it, yeah. If you've only got airflow on the far side of the sail, and you don't have airflow on the near side of the sail, that means you've got to pull your sail in. And actually what happens is the leech telltale does this. You can imagine if there's airflow on this side of the sail but not on that side of the sail, the leech telltale just does that there, okay? And then if there's airflow on both sides of the sail, the leech telltale flies normally, like that. Now from 8 meters away, which is how far you are away at the bottom of the mast, you can't tell the difference between those two at all. You just can't. So that means that if the leech telltale is flying nicely, you either have your sail set perfectly, or you need to pull your sail in. One of the two. Don't know which it is, but it's one of the two. However, if you've got your airflow on this side of the sail only, and you need to let your sail out, And the leech tail does this. It just goes mad. It falls off the back of the sail like that. And so it's very, very good at telling you what's that critical line of if your sail is hooked or not. And so what we always say is that if you're using your leech tails, you obviously don't want it flying all the time 100%, because if you're doing that, then you might well have your sail too far out. It might be wrong. So you can't rely on that being correct. But if you play it so that your leech tail is flying about 80% of the time, like it's flying, and then, oh, it's just fallen, but it's come back again. Or it's just fallen and it's come back again. Or if it just falls, you just let it out very slightly, and you essentially work on that, you sail on that dividing line between this telltale breaking and not breaking. That's how you can tell that your sail's in the proper position. And I just find this leech telltale to be much more visible than what's the regular telltales are. Does that make sense? But as I said, these are illegal on darts, so don't use them at a regatta, but feel free to use them at club racing. Okay, so that's 10 to 12 knots. Actually, what I've just said does classify for lower wind strengths as well. So lower strengths, the same principles in the main occur. So the main sail, everything that I've just said matters the same. So you're constantly doing the same things, but your pressures on the main will be lower with those with that information. It's just the jib that plays differently at the lower wind strengths. So the issue is that you've got your main sail here and your jib here. If you pull your jib on too tight, which you can do in light winds, you might find that you do that. I'll draw it properly. You do that, and you close what we call the slot. And the slot is that lovely big blue airflow that we had going through there. And you essentially block it off. And in light winds, if you have your jib on too tight, you can block off the slot quite easily. Okay, so you need to keep an eye on that. So one way of keeping an eye on it is physically looking up the slot and seeing what does the shape of the jib look like. And that's quite easy because in these conditions, quite often you've got the helm sitting here and the crew sitting here. So the crew is literally able just to look up and see what the slot looks like and look at the shape of the back of the jib and set the tension accordingly. Okay. And the other way of doing it is to have a look at the telltales on the jib. Because as I said, we've got the telltales on the jib, and I said ignore the high ones, just focus on these ones here. But actually, if you look at the very top one, for example, the helm might worry about this one for steering, but the crew could worry about this one for jib tension, a bit like we did main tension earlier on. Because if the crew eases the jib very slightly, it will have almost no effect on the bottom one for the helm steering. He can carry on using that. But it will have quite a big effect on the top one, on the twist of the sail. So you can use that, and it's the same principles. If the far one is going, you let the sail out. If the near one is going, you pull the sail in. So you can use that as well in the light conditions. Okay. So now we're going to move on. Oh, in light conditions, very, very light conditions, I'm now talking to 5 knots and below. This is for helm in particular. This transition between twist and flat is even more important. It takes longer. So the lighter the conditions, it takes longer to get from a twisty to a flat position. And the sail can stall out a lot easier once you're in the flat position. So you might have to do this twisty flat transition an awful lot more. If you lose that airflow, it gets more difficult in the light stuff. All right, then we're getting into windy now. So what do I mean by windy? Windy is crew on the wire. 2 is can't pull main in all the way. Can't type. And the reason you can't pull the main in all the way isn't your strength in your arms, it's because the boat will fall over. So what do you do here? And this is where it gets a bit more interesting. Here, stop worrying about twist and flat. There's so much wind around. You will attach to the airflow, so that this whole twisting and flat thing just disappears out the window. It'll happen naturally. Don't worry about it. But the issue here is that generally you could have a sail shape like that, and this is just going to be one line, or you could have a sail shape, a green sail instead, and the green sail might be that. So you can have very, very different shapes of sail. And the black sail is a full sail and will have a lot of power, and the green sail is a flat sail and has less power. Okay. So when it's windy, you're trying to dish power. You're trying to get rid of power. You don't want a black sail. You want a green sail here in a big strong wind. You want to keep it as flat as possible, not because we're worrying about twisting the flat. We're just worrying about the amount of power you've got. You're trying to depower it. And the Dart is very, very difficult to depower. You've actually got very few controls to depower, so you have to just rely on a couple of controls. So, how do you turn your sail from a black sail to a green sail? There are two controls to do this. One of them, you'll probably think I'm mad, but I'll cover the other one first. So, that's the Dart sail. And the first of these is the Cunningham, which is at the front. Sorry, that was meant to be a mouse, but it didn't work out. So the Cunningham is the first of these controls. And that pulls down the front of the sail. We haven't really talked about it so far because at the moment, we've only had conditions up to 12 knots, and at those you just pull the Cunningham on to pull the wrinkles out. But what we're trying to do now is we're trying to stretch that front of the sail. And why are we trying to stretch that front of the sail? It's because the front of the sail has, it's less than a minute to go. So when this meeting crashes, we'll just jump straight back into the same meeting code. Okay. The front of the sail, I don't know if you've looked at it, it's actually curved. The front of the mainsail is actually, okay. All right. So what we're trying to do is, we've got a curve in the front of the sail, as I said, but the mast isn't curved. The mast is straight. And having a curved piece of material against a straight mast puts a bulge in the middle of the sail. You can imagine that. If you try and put that curved angle, or that curved sail down the straight mast, you will end up with a big bulge in the middle. You just end up with excess material just here. And it's that excess material that is causing this, how I got the picture, no, that is causing this curve in the sail. So you want to get rid of that excess material. And to do that, you use the Cunningham to bend the mast. You're trying to bend that big 9-meter mast as much as you can. And the objective is to bend it so that, well, if I can't actually draw, I might need to put it down. But you're trying to bend it so that that's your mast and that's your sail. And then if they are bent the same amount, then you've got no excess material in the middle, so you've got a flat sail. So that's where you're trying to get to. So that's how you depower the main, and that's why it works. And so when it gets windy, you want to pull on this Cunningham as tight as you can. You want to get your foot on it, and you want to stamp on it, and you want to use it, lever it as much as you can to get that as tight as you can. Okay, first thing you do. Then the second control that is helping you flatten the sail, and this is the controversial one, is your main sheet tension. Because you've only got two controls that are pulling the sail down to stretch it and bend the mast. One of them's at the front of the mast, which is your Cunningham, which is 4-to-1. And the other one is at the back of your sail, which is your main sheet, which is 8-to-1. Which is more powerful? The main sheet's actually more powerful than the Cunningham is. So the main sheet is also important here with controlling the amount of power in the sail. Now I know that's controversial because you're thinking, just a minute, If I pull my sail in, that powers it up, it doesn't depower it. And yes, you're absolutely right. It doesn't. That happens, but what we'll talk about is how you can manage it and how you can arrange this. So if it's windy, and it gets to a point where you can't pull the sail in all the way because the boat starts falling over, you want to let your sail out. But I've just said you don't want to do that because you want to keep your main sheet as tight as you can, because that's what is actually depowering the boat to a certain extent. What you want to do is you've got one more sail control to help you out with this, and that's your traveller. You want to let your traveller out here. So that rather than sheeting from this angle, you're sheeting from this angle, say. Or even when it gets really windy, you might go halfway out. And what does that mean? That means you can have a flat sail, rather than having a flat sail at that angle, you end up with a flat sail at this angle. So you've significantly depowered by letting your sail out. But you've still given yourself the opportunity of keeping this 8-to-1 main sheet to keep your sail flat. Does that make sense? So I don't want you to get too hung up on having to keep your sail in with the 8-to-1 main sheet. If you have to let it out, you have to let it out, because otherwise the boat will fall over. You have to play that main sheet. It's the most important control on the boat. But this is just a logic for letting your traveller out, rather than saying, oh, I'm just going to let buckets of main sheet out because I'm overpowered. This is why, instead of letting buckets of main sheet out, it's better to let your traveller out, so that you can then keep, your main then stays tighter, so you can keep control of the sail a lot more. Okay? So it takes a bit of practice. It is a bit counterintuitive, but that's important. There is another issue here. When this starts happening, though, the crew needs to really be on the ball here, because the crew has an extremely important job to do, and that's to do with the mast and the jib. So we've already talked about the slot here, okay? Now what the crew will have done is, it's windy, so the crew will have pulled in that jib as tight as he can, which is right. It's exactly what he should do. But the problem is that when, and I'll do this as an exaggerated drawing, but when if the crew's pulled the jib in tight, but the helm has let the mainsail out like that, okay, and there's a big gust as well. So not only is the traveller out, but the helm's let the top of the main out a little bit. So I'll draw the green line. That might have gone there because we're in a massive gust. So the top of the main is really a long way out. And then what's going to happen with this big pump of blue air, that the jib is absolutely hammering through that gap, what's going to happen to it? Well, it just hits the back of the mainsail and it shoves the main like that. What happens then is you will actually see the bottom of the whole mast derotate. Do people know what I mean by that? So here you will see the mast, rather than it being like a sail like that, the mast will just derotate like that. So the sail will still be full, but the mast will actually rotate the other way while you're going upwind. Okay? This is extremely bad to happen, especially with the crew on the wire. This is a scenario where masts snap. Because what you're doing now is, when in this scenario, on the red side, all the pressure, all the bend in the mast is going that way through the mast, the strong direction through the mast. Whereas on the green side, bad side, all the bend is now going that way in the mast, the weak way in the mast. And these masts can and do snap doing this. Oh, sorry, I just realized there's so these masts can and do snap. And if you don't snap it, you might bend it permanently. So the crew in these kinds of winds needs to be on the ball. And if they see the mast even hinting at this, or you see a bulge at the front of the sail, so what you can see is, well, even before this happens, you can start to see the front of the main do that and bulge. And if you see that happening, then the crew has to let that jib out, has to ease the jib to open it up, to open up the exhaust to let some space for that blue to go through. Okay.
Sorry, where is the bulge? Is that at the top or the bottom?
It's in the middle. It's a jib height, middle of the jib, essentially. You will actually see the whole section of the main up to about 3/4 of the way on the jib just start to bulge.
So when you say the base of the mast is derotating, what was the cause of that initially, please? So I missed that.
That's the jib. So I'll draw a bigger picture here.
So the jib forcing the air onto the back of the sail is caused. Right.
Yeah, it's just literally the force of the wind going that way on the back of the sail. It's just strong enough to derotate the entire mast.
Okay, thank you.
And because the bend then goes the wrong way, and you've got the crew on the trapeze, which is actually helping to bend the mast as well.
Yeah.
And you then can pull on the lighter main, it will snap mast. So it's very, very important to be aware of that.
What the crew just simply looking for that bulge, or is the helm looking for the bulge?
Both can, but the crew needs to be looking for it because the crew needs to let that sail out if that happens.
Fine. So as soon as it starts to derotate, let it jib out.
Okay.
Okay.
So in terms of steering in these winds, because we were talking about sail setting earlier, is one other way of depowering these sails. We talked about Cunningham, we talked about letting your traveller out, and we talked about letting your sail out. The other one is just the angle you're actually sailing at. So you can imagine that if you're sailing like that, with absolutely, and this might be a jib, with absolutely perfect telltales, then you've got loads of power. But we've already said that we don't want that much power. What you'll do, what you will actually naturally do, is you will sail very slightly closer to the wind. So you will deliberately sail slightly closer to the wind than you normally would. So I'll draw the jib a bit bigger here. You will actually sail with the near telltale flapping up slightly. And that's good. You want to get the balance, and this is where some experience comes in, is how much do you try and sail to the true direction of the jib, or how much do you actually say, no, there's too much power there, I'm actually going to go very slightly closer to the wind than the jib wants me to, just to try and depower the boat. That comes with experience. But it's a really, really important depowering tool as well. It's just heading that very slight bit closer to the wind. Okay. So, is everyone happy with that? So we've talked about upwind, but we haven't talked about single handing. We've talked about sailing with the jib. So single handing, it's much the same. And to be honest, I haven't got any. In terms of sail settings, it's the same. So with the mainsail, you're looking at the same positions, you're looking at the same things on the mainsail in terms of twist. But the thing is, you're missing one important tool, and that is your jib. The jib is the one that I've said throughout, that's the one that tells you which direction to sail in. So for single handing, it's a lot harder to know which direction to sail. You do actually have a few more telltales, and this is where some of these come in. I actually use this bottom telltale here for which one, where I'm steering. So you do have to have your main set reasonably okay to start with, but you can use this one here to give you some indication of whether you're steering the right direction. So it's the same principle as a jib. If the far one's going, then you need to head slightly closer to the wind, and if the near one's flapping, you can pull. You need to bear off. Okay. But I would use that bottom one there to do that, and then the top one can then be used for the twist in the sail. So you're looking at different places on the sail for different indications. You'll probably find that the single-handing boats can sail very slightly close to the wind as well. But a lot of it, Paul, is on feel, and a lot of it is just experience. So you're going along and you're thinking, I'm just going very slightly slower than I feel I should be. Something just feels wrong. It feels like the boat isn't quite going properly, and that means you're stalled out. So you might need to you might need to bear off and ease the sail and then pull it back in again. Or it might be that you haven't got enough twist, you've got too much twist in the sail. So there's different ways of, you've just got this bit of experience, to be honest, but those are your indications. All right. So that's upwind. Downwind. I must admit, downwind is not my forte. I'm just checking my laptop battery. I've got 33%, and it's not got a great battery, so that's sort of my limiting factor here. We've got downwind is like this, and you've got your jib and your main. So the jib is awful picture. Sorry, I was going to start again. So the jib wants to be held out like that. This is now in medium conditions. I'm not going to go too much into windy conditions right now. Well, might do. But the crew pretty much wants to hold the jib out nicely to try and get as much airflow as possible, because the main will be out here. Where do you set your main? You set it with traveller all the way out, and you set up probably the blocks about that far apart. You want it so that the main is just about touching the shrouds. That's sort of an indication of where you want to go. And then again, it's a bit like upwind. You're dealing with this on steering. And this is feel, to be honest. There's not much more to say to it than that. Downwind is all about that feel on the steering. So what you want to be doing is the fastest way downwind for a dart is to actually do angles. It's not to go straight downwind. You want to do an angle about 45 degrees to the wind. And what you'll find is that if you point down too low, you'll have no power whatsoever, and the boat will just be going dog slow. However, if you're pointing too high, then you have all the power in the world, but you won't actually be going in the right direction. So the trick is, with the steering, is to work out where that line is. And you need to play this line. So you need to go up and down and feel where that line is. And what you'll find is that there will be a point, if you're just playing around, and you'll do this every single time you go out, you play around, and suddenly the power will just drop. There's literally a cliff edge where the power just goes whoosh, and you just stop. And then you just come back up again. And you just want to work on that fine line of where the power is and where it isn't. And you're just playing on that power line all the time. And that's how you go downwind on these things. So yeah, downwind sail settings, they're pretty far out, pretty much just touching the shroud on the main. And it's all about the steering on playing with that power. Okay. Same principles in heavy winds. But yeah, when you're overpowered, you just need to bear off that bit more. You'll find that these angles are a bit more like this on a heavy wind.
Just fundamentally, then, just to ease my misunderstanding, are we suggesting that we're almost galleoning at that point, that we are being pushed by the wind, or are we making such progress that we are actually acting in an aerofoil?
You are still acting in an aerofoil. So it's called apparent wind. So you can imagine if the wind's going that direction.
It's just a physical movement of the wind passing the sail because you are moving forward.
Yeah. So yeah, so you're going that direction. The wind's going that direction, but because you're going that direction so fast, the wind that you feel is actually coming from there. Does that make sense? A bit. Different story, okay? So we're on the motorway.
Yeah.
You're in a car on the motorway. Motorway's that direction. You're going that way. You're in a little car. You're going that way. Now the wind is going the same direction as you. And you've got a 20-mile-an-hour wind, but you're going at 70 mile an hour.
Yeah,
so if you stick your head
forward, okay.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the exact same principle. So if you stick your head out the window, you've got 50 mile an hour coming in your face. So these boats are going fast enough that with them going down here, the actual wind might be going that way, but the two combined winds, the wind with you traveling and the wind and the actual wind, the effective wind that you feel is probably from that direction. It actually comes across the boat.
Right.
And so that's what enables the aerofoil to still work.
And hence why it drops down.
Yeah. Whereas if you go dead downwind, that's when you turn into a Spanish galleon, and that's why it's slow.
Right.
So yeah, that point at which I was saying where the power is, essentially that's the point at which your aerofoil stops working.
And so just trying to get my head around it. Why is the wind coming obliquely at 45 degrees to the actual wind? When you say the apparent wind is coming in that direction, I don't quite understand that. Because if you're heading down,
no, we're going that way, and that wind's going that way. So from our movement, we will feel a wind going that way. So we're going that way at 6 knots.
Yeah. Okay.
The wind's going that way at I don't know. It might be 6 knots as well.
Yeah.
So we are feeling a 6 knot wind there.
Mm-hmm.
So we're feeling 2 winds. We've got a 6 knot wind that direction, a 6 knot wind that direction. So the average of those two is going to be what, a 7 knot wind that way.
Right.
And so that's the wind that we feel.
Right.
And that's what we sail off.
Okay, thank you.
And that's called apparent wind sailing. The effect isn't that big on a dart, and you don't need to worry about it. But this is just why the aerofoils still work. On the F-18, for example, when you've got the spinnaker boats, they sail off apparent wind and it comes really far forward. I've had apparent wind so far forward on the F-18 that you're going downwind, but the jib is flapping. It's bizarre. So that's downwind. So the downwind is mostly on the steering, to be honest. It's all about going up, getting that airflow connection, and then going down as low as you can while still keeping that airflow. And then as soon as that airflow breaks and the boat slows down, you can feel it. Then you come back up again and take the airflow back again. And you just try to sail on that line all the way down. Okay, just check my battery, 25%. So we've got enough to do reaching. So reaching, we've got upwind there and we've got downwind there. And I'm going to classify reaching as anything in this angle here, anything at all. Okay. So what are the principles here? There really is no one correct way of doing this, quite frankly. For the crew, it's much easier because the crew's got one sail control, and that's the jib sheet. And the crew is now, suddenly, we're not going upwind anymore. So the crew has to pay attention to these telltales now. And the crew is having to control that. So you've got your green telltale on the back and your red telltale on the front. So just like the mainsail, if the jib is too far out, that means the red one will be flapping, so you need to pull it in. Or if it's too far in, the green one will be flapping, you need to let the jib out. It's as simple as that, okay? So that's what the crew needs to be doing. How about the helm? The helm, now I haven't got any right answers here, and it often depends on what you want to do. So the helm's got two choices, really, because you've got two ways of sailing this. You could choose to have your traveller all the way in, or you could choose to have your traveller all the way out, or somewhere in the middle. You could choose to essentially leave your traveller in the middle, or you could play with it. And that's entirely your call on wind strengths and what you're trying to do here. But what we're doing is we're essentially saying, do you want to have a twisty sail or do you want to have a flat sail? Because if you want to go down the reach and just set your bottom or your middle main telltale and concentrate on that one because it's the average of the sail, and say I want that middle telltale to be perfect. So you let your sail out if the far one's flying and you pull your sail in if the near one's flapping. Then you'll end up with the bottom of the sail like that, the middle of the sail like that, the next part of your sail like that, and then the green part like that. And you'll end up with an amazingly twisty sail. So you'll have a boat that will react and a boat that you can work with because any change that you do, the boat will behave really well, but it's not necessarily the fastest you can possibly go. If you want the boat that's the fastest you can possibly go, then you might choose to have a flat sail, as we talked about earlier. Generally, once you're up at speed, a flat sail's better. So you might choose to have your traveller further out, but have your main further in, for example. And then the middle of the sail will also be set, but you'll have more of the sail set as well. The whole sail might be set. The problem with that is that the boat is then less reactive because you're driving permanently in 6th gear. And if anything happens, to get out of 6th gear back into 1st gear means you've got to put more twist in the sail. And when you do that, you're going to be letting your sail out an awful lot. And so you could lose power a lot, and then it's going to take you quite a lot to get back to that. So you might have to play with your steering, for example, if you do lose attachment. I think I tend to go somewhere in the middle because the boat isn't that reactive on this potentially optimum setting. It's not that reactive, it's not that easy to keep there. So I would tend to probably go somewhere in the middle. But again, this is all experience and just playing with it and then playing with these settings. So if you had to put a gun to my head and say, how do I set things for different angles? I would probably personally, and again, this is personal taste. If we're going upwind, obviously we keep the traveller centered. If we're going this kind of angle here, I would probably still have the traveller centered, quite frankly. Probably still keep that twist in the sail. If we're going properly across, I'd probably have the traveller out by about that much. And then the further we're getting towards downwind, it will obviously go further out. Those are probably my rules of thumb of where I would start, and then I'd focus on that middle telltale on the main. The one that's here as an average setting for the sail to work out what's happening. And that's probably where I would land there. Yeah, when it gets windy, for obvious reasons, the traveller goes further out. Because if you've already started up, if you're going upwind with your traveller out, I'm certainly not going to ask you to pull it in for going across. You'd be letting it out even further. Okay. That's pretty much everything I wanted to cover. So has that covered off your questions, Nick, what you wanted to talk about?
Yes, and it pretty much explains my misunderstanding of when I was out with Mike, because Mike, I probably didn't appreciate that we were reaching at the point when he started to let his traveller out. And I'm sort of looking at it and thinking, well, we're not going downwind. Why is he doing that? So no, yeah, I understand that. Thank you.
Okay. Paul, does that cover everything that you wanted to?
Yes, it's been really helpful, John. Thank you very
Excellent.
much.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure. If you think of any ideas for another weekend, do give me a shout. I think we're going to be stuck in lockdown for a little while. So yeah.
Mm. Is this available to re-watch, Jonathan? How do we do that?
It will be. I'll put the link on the dark group later on.
Great, excellent. Thank you for that. Really good.
All right. Thanks both. Appreciate it.
Good afternoon.
All three of you. Sorry. Thanks. Appreciate it. And yeah, I will see you guys soon.
Excellent. Cheers, sir.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.